Right, hello and welcome to the Panachecast. This is Panache Software's legal podcast, or legal technology podcast. And the first thing I want to say is we're back.
We're back.
We're back. We might as well introduce that. We've had a bit of time off. I said to Neil before, the parliamentary structure in Panache Software is very complicated, and we've had to prorogue the company for a couple of weeks while we sorted out what we were going to do.
Yeah.
We thought we'd follow the trend of what seems to be in trend at the moment. We might kind of thing.
We don't follow it too closely because if he's going to dissolve Parliament or Queen's going to dissolve Parliament when Jeremy takes over, then we don't want to be doing that ourselves. So
no, that's right. I don't think we want to dissolve anything like that, and also we don't want the complete disaster that could come afterwards either, which looks like we're hurtling towards at a very scary speed. So we're going to try and avoid that. We've decided to come back and hopefully things are back to normal. We had a few weeks off due to unforeseen circumstances and things, but I'm sure you all missed us.
All the French viewers will have been on holiday anyway, Pete, so it won't matter. And as you know, our cousins in France, as they are still our cousins at the moment, they will have enjoyed the break, I'm sure. So I think they have August off, don't they?
I think a lot of European countries do. I know a lot of people I've worked with before have long periods off over the summer. I mean, if only we were in Europe.
How have we been in the EU and not had August off?
I know. See, these are the benefits we should be taking, but we decided not to. But anyway, so everyone can calm down now. We are back. We're going to hopefully be back on track, so you can cancel your Netflix subscriptions and things. There is something better to watch on now. So
yes, they still haven't been in touch with us. I can't believe that.
No, I know. We're still waiting.
Yeah.
But yeah. So this week it's episode 15 now, and we've got a couple of things to talk about. On the agenda, we've got BT potentially looking to sell their software division Tikit, an article by the Association of Corporate Counsel, and that's about do law firm subsidiaries drive legal innovation or not. We've also got we talked about in the last episode the Land Registry's webinar on tokenisation. Yeah. So we're going to just go through what they discussed there, and also we want to introduce probably in the next week or so a continuation of the legal project management series we've been running, this time talking about pricing, but we thought it worthwhile. Neil's going to do a sort of a small introduction to that this week, to hopefully have a more in-depth follow-on afterwards.
Exactly, yeah. So we did legal project management a few episodes ago now, where we just started the idea of things that are covered, and then we went into that in a bit more detail. We'll follow the same kind of protocol here and come up with a very brief intro to pricing, and then we'll look at it in more detail next time probably.
Great. Okay.
Yeah. The other thing, as we always say at the beginning and at the end, is we're on Patreon, which is where our page is most quickly updated. I think that's the first notification I get of when the new episodes come out. Go and have a look at that if you can. That's patreon.com/Panache Software. I know at least one other person who gets their updates from there, but if we could grow that to 2, that would be ideal.
So if we could double the numbers, that would be awesome.
That would be ideal. So patreon.com/Panache Software, that's where everything is hosted. Links to the show, we'll put materials on there, and people who submit questions through that will get priority when they start coming in.
And we'll look to we're putting together some material for the legal project management stuff, so that will go up on there first, and be available there.
Yeah, exactly.
Before we then figure out how to get it elsewhere and stuff. So
precisely. So to carry on with the news articles then. The first one was toward the beginning of August, I think it was when the news has announced, and a couple of things have come through since then, is Tikit supposedly being sold by BT, and the figure quoted is £80 million. Tikit are a legal software provider. I think they were acquired by BT early 2011 or 12, something of that order, 7 or 8 years ago. Doesn't sound like that's worked out terribly well for BT. Strange acquisition in the first place, a telecoms company acquiring legal services, but maybe they wanted to bring some function in-house. Anyway, that's not the news. The news is their potential sale and what that means for the market, I guess. And Tikit, I think probably their most well-known platform is Carpe Diem, the time recording platform, but they have got loads of other stuff. And they're signing up new firms even now. Recently, I think there was an article on their site that says they've signed up House Percival to a new series or a new number of solutions that they've got, four solutions, I think. And they seem to be evolving still, but somebody will be looking for them. And I guess we had a few decent acquisitions in August, didn't we? Thomson Reuters acquiring HiQ, so their coffers might be a bit dry. And but maybe there's other funders out there or equity houses that will be looking to buy.
I mean, well, we've just seen quite a few. As you said, the last episode we did, I think we had multiple acquisitions during that episode. And I'm imagining that on this side of things, again, it will be a decision will be made to whoever's looking to take on Tikit and stuff. As is normally the case in these things, it will be acquiring additional customer base for whoever brings them on. I mean, what this will actually mean to the software that Tikit produce, that's always the hazy point of these acquisitions. As we said in that last episode, what tends to happen is another organisation will take them on, will buy that mainly to expand their own customer base, and quite often the software that organisation produced originally gets brought into the others or abandoned, which is always a shame. But
well, I read briefly through one of their case studies today. Their product line, if I can call it, that looks quite good actually. They integrate with a lot of other things like InfoTrack searches and several other different platforms that they integrate with already, which is great. That's useful, provided it's a proper and true integration. Unfortunately, their video demos don't really show full usability, so that would be nice if they do a bit more on that. But one thing I noticed was missing from a couple of things I noticed were missing from their website is they didn't blab on about AI and blockchain.
No.
So
there you go.
How they can't be that cutting edge. But actually, everything that they did have to me looked actually quite user friendly. Things that you might want to use, all cloud based as is necessary nowadays. And it's just about case and workflow automation. So quite interesting looking package for someone to swallow up.
Yeah, and an interesting thing you said there. And can we ask this of more software providers, that when you're producing videos and stuff, detailing what your packages do and stuff, can more people show what their packages do? Yeah, because quite often, and this is not directed solely at Tikit. This is directed at
pretty much everybody.
90% of the other software providers out there, is that people do not show their software up and running.
No. Why do you suppose that is?
Well, I mean...
Well, first of all, what they do show are cartoon characters, aren't they? Sitting behind a desk and looking busy, or, bits of paper turned into an aeroplane that flies across the screen and lands somewhere else. It's just all... It's great in terms of
the idea of the thing, but I mean, from my point of view, when I'm looking for something to buy, I want to see what I'm going to be using, and I want to have some idea as to how it works. And I always find that a struggle on all these sites. I know it doesn't make for a particularly interesting video, and maybe that's one of the key reasons why people don't do it. But at least have some video on there that shows it. It doesn't have to be the main one, because when you're out there looking for a new software solution, looking for a new package, you want to see it up and running. I mean, take something like the App Store on your mobile phone, where you get screenshots of the package that you're going to be buying to help you make the decision. It's one of those things that I think people need to start doing better. You don't have to only show your package, but at least have some videos where you're showing how people interact with it, what your solution does.
Yeah, well, adoption is one of the big killers, isn't it? Or lack of adoption is one of the big killers of these technology solutions. And if they don't get adopted, they just die. And so you don't know if you're going to be able to adopt it or how well it's going to be adopted if you can't look at it physically. And do you remember when you and I spoke to Seedcamp a few years ago now about friction points and making things simple and easy? And when we were talking to them about the document automation element that we were working on, that aspect of our platform at the time was done within the platform, although we have add-ins, to mean that you can be working within a Word document. I think what they were saying to us was, well, look, if I'm working on a document, I want to work on the document in the document itself, and so we had to sort of reverse engineer that. But that, I think their concern, and bearing in mind that they are out there funding startup companies and getting people through to the next level, so they hopefully will know from customer feedback that making things user friendly is critical to things' success. If you don't show that it's user friendly, you don't show what it looks like when you use it. How do you expect anyone to really take you seriously and buy what you're espousing?
Yeah, I mean, if you were looking to buy any other product out there,
if
you're looking to go and buy a new car, going to buy a new sofa or something like that, you wouldn't expect to just get a video of the concept of how it works and for you to decide, yes, that's what I want to go with. Then you would expect to see the thing you're going to buy. And I think that's the key thing.
That's a good point. I've never seen anyone buy one of the cartoon cars from the Milky Way advert.
No, exactly. Like that.
So, although that would be quite good.
Yeah, maybe if they sold them, that would work that way. Yeah, who knows? But so an interesting thing, potentially more acquisitions in the way what it means for Carpe Diem and the software that Tikit produce. We'll have to wait and see and see if this actually does materialise into a sale. At the moment, it looks like they're looking to sell it. It doesn't suggest that they have sold it.
No, exactly.
So I'm guessing it's all part of BT's restructuring their organisation. So.
Well, I don't think we'll be buying it based A, on the valuation, and B, on the fact that they've only got cartoon demos. It's no good to us.
A bit out of our price range at the moment. And
slightly.
Yeah, we'll think about it then.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we go on to the next one. So this was a document, let's say, published by the Association of Corporate Counsel, again, sort of the beginning of the month or the end of July, I think it was. And this was Do Law Firm Subsidiaries Drive Legal Innovation? And this is something that we've had numerous discussions on. And they're talking about whether, the practice of a law firm spinning off an additional organisation that is just looking at innovating actually works. And I think this is an interview with Ryan McLeod, it seems, from Sunte Advisors. And his takeaway from this is that rather than creating a spin-off organisation or a subsidiary organisation purely just looking at how they can innovate the existing organisation, the takeaway that he takes from this is that you should actually create a subsidiary law firm itself, which is geared to using new and innovative ways of dealing it, and direct those customers that are interested in working in those ways to that subsidiary law firm.
Yeah.
Which we weren't 100% sure or 100% sold on that. I don't know.
Well, I think some of what he says has got some very sound logic and the basis behind, I think, him coming to that conclusion. I have to say I probably would agree with, because especially the big firms that can afford their own technology innovators will inevitably be quite political. I mean, a lot of organizations are. Most of the big firms will now have lead partners and so on, but not necessarily a sort of traditional chief executive that will just make a decision. Excuse me. So there's still quite a lot of politicking going on within firms, and I suspect that's why he thinks, you could really take the brakes off of some, a new firm with innovative push behind
that is wholly geared to a new innovative way of working. You don't have to worry about those entrenched senior partners possibly who don't want to change how they work, or not just individual partners but actual organisations in the company in the firm that don't want to change their working practices. Yeah,
but I mean, I guess you could say, well, if you spin off some of the work, I mean, my immediate view is, well, that firm will then become a competitor of your own firm, and that seems like an inherently bad idea. You might say it's not going to be a competitor because it's going to be doing a different type of work, more of a commoditized work, maybe because that work is neatly lifted out of the current firm, and then maybe you get into a scenario where you really are driving the two firms in completely different directions. I don't really see if you open up a subsidiary firm, now I don't know whether he thinks it's going to be entirely independent, but I find it hard to imagine any firm would completely separate themselves from any aspect of their work voluntarily, unless they genuinely don't want to do it anymore and are quite happy to take some of the profits. Maybe that's it. But if there's any link between them, there is still going to be an inherent reporting line, and there's going to be the politics will still be there at some point. You know, if you're a subsidiary or if you are related in any way, you're still going to have to report back to the parent company, to the mothership, how things are looking, and that's going to determine probably how much investment you get to begin with. Because let's face it, you're not going to start from day one with a massive turnover and be self-sufficient. You're going to be taking funds out of the parent company. So
and also, you know, you're not immediately, if you're spinning off a firm like this, they're not immediately going to be using solely the innovative new practices. The assumption would be that, you know, if you were looking to spin off a firm, a organisation to look at how your firm could innovate better, that's what your subsidiary firm would do. But they can't start with that innovation. They have to build up to it. So what practices they're going to take in the meantime? It's going to be the practices inherent to the parent firm. Yeah. So, in which case, why would any of your clients want to move to this subsidiary? I don't know. I'm not.
No, sure. I don't know. And we've talked before about when you're setting up the innovation projects, about maybe some firms should be collaborating with each other more rather than trying to go it alone, and still haven't seen anybody do that yet. So clearly the viewers are not heeding our advice just yet. But maybe they will at some point. Yeah. But I mean, one interesting point which Ryan does make, and I do agree with, and that's why I was reaching over here, is that he gives the example of Microsoft, and obviously Microsoft will have operations everywhere. They'll have a massive panel of, well, you'd think they'd have a massive panel of firms. And it seems as though they have open days and invite their law firms to come in and present to them what their innovations are. Yeah, that'd be quite daunting, wouldn't it? Trying to go to Microsoft and say, "Oh, we're very innovative,
innovating in our new technologies."
Yeah, I suppose they'll be reporting to Microsoft's lawyers who may not be innovative, but who knows? Yeah. But that was interesting. That what he's saying, and I think this is right, is that it's client led in many respects. Yeah. The client has said to their law firms, "Come and tell us what you're doing." And I think the point that you made before we started filming was very good, was that they aren't going to expect each firm to say, "Oh, well, we're working on these half dozen things each," and for there to be a huge amount of overlap between them. That doesn't really serve them particularly well. No.
So, and this is where we keep banging on about this, in that you kind of want collaboration in the industry and between the firms, and you know, it is well and good all of these individual firms looking to innovate and change the way they work, but what you want is sort of cross-industry innovation and practices that cover all of the firms, so that you're not ending up with lots of disparate ways of working and things like that. And I think that's the key thing that we want people to move towards, is that rather than every firm spinning off their own subsidiary firm to look at innovation, maybe some of these larger firms should be innovating together if they can.
Absolutely.
To partner up. I know it's always seems a scary thing, partnering with your competitors and things like that, but actually, you know, I think that the trouble with doing it alone is no matter what you say and what you do, you're always governed by the old ways of doing things, how it was done in your firm. And I've noticed you know, I've been building sort of customization for people in various industries, so across local government, in professional services, charities, everything like that, for sort of the last sort of 15 years or so. And quite often you'll get a customization requirement will come in from one of those organisations, and one of the first things they say is, you know, surely other people are asking for this to happen. Surely other people do things this way. And what you quite often find is nobody does it like you do in your firm, I'm afraid. And you end up always producing something that is still solely geared to that one organisation, because everyone does something differently. No one does anything the same way. As much as you think people would, they don't. No,
and bearing presumably you're the 100% cost holder of maintaining and developing that. But I mean, okay, that comes with the advantages of people using it if they do. But as you just said, it doesn't happen often.
So these innovations and stuff, when you're looking, how can I innovate my firm? One of the key things may be, well, what are other firms doing?
Indeed,
They may be doing stuff that to us would be innovative, and vice versa. So I just feel that this sort of cross-pollination between the firms is going to be the key thing.
Absolutely, in that context. But innovation, although this is a tech podcast and we're a tech company, innovation doesn't necessarily mean it has to be tech-driven.
No, definitely not.
One of the examples that is in the another webinar, which I'll refer to later when we come on to the project management stuff, the chap who was giving the talk was saying one of the firms that he has consulted with is innovated by going to their clients, which are education-based clients, each of which had their own in-house lawyer, and went to all those places and said, well, look, why don't you, between you, use us? And suppose it's a half a dozen institutions, each had their own in-house lawyer. They then offered the services that those in-house lawyers were providing. Now, that's bad news for those people, unfortunately. Maybe they got tupied over, although this is in America, they may not have tupi over there. But some equivalent of transferring over. But that firm was then able to grow that section of their business quite a bit, by the sounds of things, because they were offering, a collaborative solution to several different clients. Fantastic for them, and I guess that's what a lot of firms do. But it wasn't a situation where they went to those institutions individually and said, we could do the same work for you as your general counsel or whatever, because you could do that with any customer. I think they went to them as a whole and said, allow us to help you, and then help you save the money internally. You're otherwise got 6 people doing the same job for you.
Yeah, and I've seen this in primarily in sort of local government as well, where quite often you have projects involved where they have a shared services organisation. So therefore, multiple councils will take the same service, and they will all fit into that one way of doing things, because it may go against how they used to do things, but actually by standardizing across multiple areas, it makes for reduces costs significantly when you're all doing the same thing, but also means that the sharing of information, the sharing of anything between these organizations is so much simpler. And that's the kind of thing that you want to look for in this industry as well, in the legal industry, is these shared services that the firms can set up together and can all run together.
Well, and if there's any more doubt as to whether it's a good idea or not, then I'll just leave people with this. Back when I was fresh out of university and working for the NHS, I was in the payroll department as I paid for my continuing legal education. And even the NHS was doing shared service payroll services, where I was in Bristol and I was paying Bath and a few other sort of local people. Now, I don't think you can have one NHS payroll service, because there's over 1 million, well, there were over 1 million people in the NHS at one point. But if the NHS can get it right as far as it was in 2002, I think, so getting on to 20 years ago and in the NHS, then surely we should be thinking about that in legal technology.
It shouldn't be too much of a problem to crack for here.
That's got to be the sell, hasn't it? That's got to be the plug. You must be able to make it work. Yeah. Enough of that. Should we go on to the final news?
Yeah. So the final thing we talked. I think it was in the last episode. There was a webinar by the Land Registry, following on from their Digital Street initiative that they're running at the moment, which is in its 3rd year.
I think that's right. Yeah.
And they were talking about tokenisation in this aspect, so tokenizing,
which I rather technologically described as blockchainy in the last sounded blockchainy, which it was.
So I mean, it's basically using an electronic token to represent the legal ownership of a property. So, I mean, boiled down to its simplest form, rather than having a piece of paper, you've got a electronic token.
Yeah.
And if you have that token, you are the owner of that property. Kind of along those lines. Yeah, that's boiling it down, very simplifying things. It's not quite like that, but as a concept,
it's not a paper register with a red line back. I don't want to know.
But no, but we've got there's a link to the webinar. It ran at the time. I think there were some technical hiccups at the time.
Yeah, they had a demonstration of what they were doing, and when they released that, it somehow there was a glitch in the matrix or something. But it works fine if you go to the link, which we'll put up. So I didn't watch it live, but I was able to catch on later. But they talked through some interesting points, and some of the interesting aspects of it, from understanding what the Land Registry are actually doing, is that they've looked into this, but they themselves don't necessarily know quite how this could be used as what major benefits they could gain from doing it, and they're kind of looking to the market to drive that. They're saying we could tokenize and digitize the Land Registry, but what would you do with that if we did it? That's what I got across from it. It's a good thing we're here to tell them what they need to be doing.
Exactly. Yeah.
Otherwise, they'd be lost.
Yeah, that's right.
But it was a very clear invitation for the market to get involved with what they're doing, and although they've got a demo, it's not like they're actually using this stuff at the moment. But we had a good chat before, didn't we, as to what it could be used for and how it might work, and we came up with a few ideas just ourselves. And another project which they're working on is this, which we should probably just mention here briefly because it will fit into what we talk about, is potentially having a 3D register, so that, I don't know how this would work exactly, but if anyone out there has got a Microsoft Surface Book, you can go on to, I can't remember what the tool is, but there's one of the tools that you can just sort of rotate this bumblebee around and you can see all different angles of it. And I think that's probably how it would work, really. A bit like Google Earth, I imagine, that you would look at a building, you could have a look at the different layers of ownership from, take London, for example, where obviously you have the roads and everything above it, but there's also an underground network there, which is owned by London Underground and others probably. And if you're just looking at that from straight above, then it's difficult to depict sometimes where things are. Now, you can describe it in words and say everything below 20 metres below the surface is owned by London Underground, down to, let's say 20 metres down to 60 or whatever. I'm just chucking out numbers. And then below that again is owned by the owner of the land above. Who knows? But if they could come up with a 3D imaging solution, that would be great. But what that brings, I think, is a very, very detailed and difficult to manage structure of ownership, potentially. And this is, I think, where digitization might help us. Things will be more easily transferable. We'll be able to look at the information, get the information much quicker than we currently can. It's not that you can't get it now, but it's just not easily accessible. And hopefully that's what they're talking about doing, is making everything far more accessible and easier to understand and see.
Yeah, I think you sort of hit the nail on the head there. Is that just digitizing the Land Registry is as it is at the moment, and tokenizing the Land Registry and the ownership as it is at the moment, in of itself is a useful endeavour. But then, what does that then allow you to do? And as we were discussing earlier, there's before we started the show, is at the moment there's certain limitations on the number of registered owners for a property and things like that. As soon as you start digitizing these kind of things, those issues go away. My thoughts would be that those limitations only exist because when you're doing everything in a paper-based system, and when you've got humans managing this kind of stuff, as soon as you're getting over sort of 4 registered owners and stuff, it becomes quite difficult for people to manage. So, that's why these things were set in the first place. And also, people probably never thought there would need to be more than these registered owners years and years ago. If you're tokenizing things, then and letting the computer or the systems deal with that, the system, your computer system that's interrogating this doesn't care whether there's 4 owners or there's 400 owners.
Yeah,
it's just another data point for it. Take for instance something like a Bitcoin. If you were to invest in Bitcoins at the moment, a Bitcoin itself, I haven't checked recently, is probably worth $8,000 or something. They're quite expensive. If you want to buy just £500 worth of Bitcoin, what you will actually receive is 0.1% of a Bitcoin. So that single Bitcoin is split up between potentially thousands and thousands of owners. And although in itself the Land Registry is not saying that's what we're going to do, as part of this tokenization, as part of this digitization of it, these are the kind of things they open it up to.
Well, I mean, I suppose if you're watching and thinking, well, that just doesn't apply to property, well, it's probably true right now, and it doesn't. But you're thinking of different types of property too. So for your house, it just doesn't work, and I think it'd be very hard to imagine a future where something like this is going to add much to home ownership, because most people's homes are bought with money that's not theirs. It's the bank's money, and the bank will always want things done in a sort of proper and more formal way. And I should have said it earlier, the Land Registry, one of the things they're driving at is trying to make property purchasing faster and slicker, and they make it, they draw the analogy, not the analogy, but they're drawing reference, aren't they, to the bond and stock market. And those are a completely different type of asset class, where the bonds are issued by a company, but generally speaking, when they're bought and sold on the market, they're owned by a broker or several or brokerage houses. Same for stocks and shares. Most people don't buy the shares in the company from the company itself. They buy it from a broker. So property ownership in terms of residential doesn't work that way. There's no reason why it couldn't, I suppose. Well, in terms of investment property, like suppose you're a developer and you don't really have any interest in ownership of a shopping centre, and you can't necessarily find a buyer for the whole shopping centre, then Land Registry digitization or tokenization could work quite well for that, I suspect. It might slow down your your income of money to go off and do other things, but part ownership of something owned by the local people.
But exactly. So it allows for, as soon as you start to digitize these things, maybe you can, and we're talking about this as what could you do with it, not what the Land Registry are actually thinking about doing with this kind of things, but they themselves are saying they want these kind of discussions now. And that's the kind of thing you could do. Maybe you could begin to treat property and land like a commodity, and allow you to, for someone to buy a property and sell off chunks of it to equity investors and all that kind of things. This is an enabler of that. It doesn't as I think they mentioned, changes would need changes in law and stuff to actually do these kind of things, but this is the first step to enabling that to happen.
Absolutely. It can't happen until you start with this sort of step, can it? So.
No, and one of the interesting things that I look at when we talk about these from a purely sort of a data point of view, and looking at all those tools that we now have available to us, like machine learning and things like that. One of the things that you can look at now is now that as soon as this information starts getting digitized and put out there more, it allows people to take that data and do something with it. So I think one of the things that I was discussing with Neil earlier was that, potentially you would be able to keep track of when an organisation buys properties to potentially monitor where is someone expanding their business and things like that. You can look at trends in property buying and stuff. You could say, there's a new shopping centre has been given planning, or a known developer has bought some land somewhere. You can then analyse it and say, well, that would mean that those properties in that immediate vicinity may reduce in value, but the properties further out from that may increase in value as the area is bolstered. It allows you because this information now isn't just on paper somewhere and you're having to request it via sim searches and things like that, it's just easily available.
Yeah.
It allows you to do that kind of information, to track what's happening in the whole marketplace, what people are buying, where people are buying it, and the prices these are going for, and really analyse and better, plan what you're going to do as an investment in that industry.
Yeah, that's a very good point, and it's all pointing in that sort of direction, because there's obviously this tokenization thing that they've talked about, and they're talking about Digital Street more widely as digital register. They are talking about smart contracts. They're talking about digital mortgages as well, and some of the lenders who have signed up to that. And more widely, they're talking about Geo6, and they're working with every week. They seem to be announcing, or every month maybe they're announcing another local authority that's signed up to their local land charges register. Everything is going that way. That points to much faster and much more retrievable information that will allow people to make decisions. And so, the natural language learning and machine learning, is going to be big in this sector.
Yeah, we see it in other industries. My wife works in banking and things like that, and a lot of the information now is, there's a lot of quantitative people in there looking at trending of data and trending of markets and things like that to analyse what's happening.
Well, they even do it on your own bank account, don't they? They say this expense looks unusual for you, and that can't be a human being looking at your bank account.
Exactly.
It must be an AI platform of some sort.
And the stock market as well. People are doing the same tools on the stock market to predict trends and changes in stock prices and things. As this starts being more digitized and more readily available, this kind of data, you could look at people going into that kind of market and looking to analyze property as if it was another form of another commodity.
Absolutely,
like stocks and shares. So it's a really interesting thing to look at.
Yeah, well, it's another thing for us to add to our list of things to talk to the Land Registry about. I think we need to get hold of them and see if we can get a meeting with them in the near future.
Yeah, but coming out of this, as I say, this was all on tokenization. This discussion. They're looking now for the input on the 3D land registry, which I think could be very interesting, because like you say, when you get your land registry document when you buy a house, it shows you owning this square patch of land. Do I own the underground that goes underneath it? Probably not. How do you analyse that? It's an interesting challenge, that kind of thing.
Well, in most cases I think the answer probably actually is yes, but people wouldn't necessarily know that.
So
3D that shows the be quite interesting to see how they would do it, showing it going right to the core of the earth and then out into space, which I think space is off limits. I think there is a law about that above a certain altitude where no idea.
all the precedents collapse. But
I've forgotten.
That will be tested, because I think there was a legal issue on the International Space Station the other day.
Was there?
Yes, where I think one of the astronauts accessed the bank account of her estranged husband or something like that on there. Something along that line. So it's now added a complicated legal issue as to who has the precedent in the International Space Station, a international run organisation above a certain limit.
That's a bit sad. Is she rather than looking down at Earth from space, she's looking at her iPhone?
She was looking. Well, they do have internet access in the space station. So she was checking out the bank account of her divorced husband. So
what else would you do in space?
Well, exactly. So there's interesting stuff coming. I think it's as all this as the world changes, it's things to think about, but opportunities for people. I think.
Yeah, definitely massive opportunities.
So We've got the link to the sign up of for people who are interested in looking at the 3D digital land registry stuff they're looking at. So we'll put that all in the links in the descriptions as as
Yeah, definitely.
For you to pick up.
Can't believe you missed that obvious segue though, Pete. It's the suspicious activity on my bank account. There isn't any, by the way.
Are you sure?
Yes. Well, fortunately,
yes. It came from a strange IP address, not on this, not on this planet. But, But yeah, so we wanted to do a quick cover quickly, sort of an introduction to pricing regarding the legal project management information we're talking about. So
Over to me.
Yeah, over to you to have a...
Well, I can't remember what episodes it was now, but probably 11 and 12, maybe 12 and 13, where we introduced the idea of legal project management, and the first phase of what we were doing was just a very quick counter through how you might scope a job, and then we did a much more detailed scoping of a job, and they were all based on property transactions. That's what most people would be familiar with, we think. Certainly that's what I'm most familiar with. And so pricing assumes somewhat that you've already done that. So if you haven't, then probably worth going back and watching those episodes.
I'll put the links in the description of everything so you can go back and check those.
Good idea. But just very briefly to recap that, the scoping idea is that you're setting out steps, what you're going to do on a job to get it from start to finish. And to take the property example, it's taking the instructions, reviewing the title, searches, inquiries, dealing with the contract and transfer, completion, tax submission, and Land Registry submission in a nutshell, and then any post-completion review you want to do. So that is what you've done, and then you've gone into each of those phases, and you've gone further and drilled down and made yourself essentially a long checklist of everything that you're going to do. Now that leads quite neatly then into how would you price for the work, and there's two obvious ways. There's what's called bottom up and top down, and the bottom up approach would be effectively looking at what you think it's going to cost in terms of the time to do each of those units of work, however you break that down and however much time you think it's going to take you, and then applying the multiplier of your hourly rate to that, and then coming out with an aggregate number, which I suspect if most people did that honestly, they would be probably 50%, maybe twice as much as they actually quote for on the open market by using the sort of finger in the air approach. That would be bottom up, is sort of adding up the individual bits and then coming to an aggregate. The top down is saying, okay, well, the client has or is willing to pay this much. So sticking with a conveyancing transaction, maybe the answer is £1,000 for a purchase or $750. That'll depend on where you are and who you are and what kind of property you're buying, etc., etc. But let's take £1,000 for the purposes of this. You'd say, okay, well, I have to then fit everything into £1,000. Now, if you've done the bottom up exercise and you come to 1,500, then you have to make 1,500 fit into 1,000. I mean, my immediate answer would be it doesn't, no matter how you cut it.
No, I didn't do a maths degree, but I'm pretty sure it doesn't work like that.
Yeah. So I think the question is, pricing can be sensitive in so many different ways. If you were genuinely the only player in the market, you could just quote whatever you wanted and get paid, right? But that isn't the case. Now, it might be the case for some very bespoke or specific types of transaction where you are the expert, the leading person, and you can, to a degree, charge what you want. Yeah. But for most of us, there are market forces at play that mean you are within a zone and you can't really stray too far beyond that. So the scoping exercise is still useful to determine what you're doing and how you might make savings. Remember, one of the first things we said about scoping is to challenge whether you genuinely need to be doing everything within the scope or whether you can do things differently. But having made that assessment of how much a job costs, and bear in mind as well, there's conveyancing at one end of the spectrum, and I'm not saying the spectrum in terms of complexity, because I actually think some aspects of conveyancing, when done properly, can be quite complex. At the other end, there are, infrastructure development projects or, international corporate acquisitions with massive institutions all over the world. Like if you were to merge Microsoft and
Apple or Google,
how would you do it? Or Sainsbury and Tesco. I mean, it's not just the supermarkets; it's all the everything else that goes in behind it.
Head offices, the banking
distributions they've got.
Everything.
So everything. Now, how would you do one of those jobs? I personally think the only way to do those kinds of bigger jobs is the bottom up. But you will probably still do a bottom up against several other firms, and maybe there'll be some price chipping. Now, what I want to just cover quickly, just making sure I've not missed anything out on that list. The competitive pricing being one of the things, but there was a very interesting, another note for the show notes, Pete, a lecture by Jasper Consulting, which was a webinar I think was put on by the American Bar Association, and it's called Improving Pricing Outcomes in Your Firm. So directly relevant to what we're talking about. Yeah. Now that's quite useful. It's about 45-50 minutes or so, but it's worth watching because there are several examples in that of what you could do, what firms typically do in terms of pricing. It's not going to take you through a specific example, nor will it say you should be pricing or you breaking down your work in this particular way. It's just talking about what firms do on pricing, but also what the customer's views of pricing is.
Yeah.
Now I happen to do a bit of work where I'm working for banks, and maybe I'm financing a purchase of a property or the development of a property. And what the bank will do is the bank has its own customer, which is the borrower, and they will say to the borrower, look, we have these 2 or 3 prices from panel firms that we're happy to use. So which of these firms do you want us to use? Well, the customer inevitably chooses the cheapest. So sometimes it's not necessarily about anything but price, but more often than not, and I would say in more cases, it is about something other than price that wins the work. Now you've got to be in the right ballpark, I guess. But you will. Most of the viewers, I'm sure, will have had a circumstance where they've had a call from a customer who said, "Yeah, look, it's very close, but I'm being quoted X by another firm. Could you possibly just do it a bit cheaper?"
Yeah.
Now, sometimes that might be true, and sometimes it might not be true.
Yeah.
And that's up to the individual people to take a view on that. But what I would say is, the way law firms typically are structured is that they have all these fixed costs of buildings and people and equipment and so on. And if you start chipping your prices down, you're just chipping away at the profit.
Yeah.
Whereas, suppose we have a job and we are going to charge £1,500 of it. Let's, for the sake of argument, say £500 covers the salary of all the people. £500 covers the equipment and the buildings. There's £500 of profit. Well, if you drop your price by to the market £1,000, there's no profit. Assuming
it's the profit that gets wiped out.
It's gone. So even though you've only given a third discount, you've wiped out all of the profit, which makes it pointless.
Yeah.
I think part of the problem is, and where I think firms could do more, is educating their people on not just the charge out rates, but the profitability rates, because that information is not so widely known, it's much less visible. In the day-to-day jobs of most lawyers, I think they probably are seeing the market prices, they probably know, they're probably fairly well clued up on the charge out rates for individuals where they are still recording time in that way, even if they're not billing in that way. Yeah. But what they don't have necessarily a good grasp on is, okay, well, I might be charging 100, 200, 300, but I don't know what the actual profit rate is
from that.
And that's probably because the cost of the business is just not that widely known, and it's somewhat artificial in that people have sick leave and it's quite difficult to actually work out those things. But a headline figure of what you need to recover, or some percentage of what you need to recover in order to make a profit, would be useful for most people, I think. So that should be shared internally, I think. I also want to give a bit of a plug here to Taylor Mowbray, who I've had a couple of training sessions with Robert Mowbray before at different firms, and he's very good at dealing with the idea of capturing all the time, so that an element of his advice is making sure you capture all the time that goes onto a file, and only then can you really properly identify how much time it takes you to do a transaction, and therefore you can start to get into what you should be charging, what price you should be charging. But he's also very good at saying about the profitability and the costs and so on, and the things that go into making up those numbers. So I would put a bit of a plug for him. Maybe we can ask him if he can come on one day. That'd be nice. Yeah. I also just want to go back and say, I mentioned earlier that it isn't necessarily price as the only factor. And if you go and watch this video, you'll see a couple of other things like value, the relationship with the customers, their experience, their image of your expertise is often more important. It doesn't seem to me that often that you make decisions based solely on price. I mean, take the idea of buying a car, for example. You don't necessarily base it just on price. You base it on taste. And even when you have that car service, you have a choice. You can go back to the manufacturer's garage and have it serviced, and you're going to be paying over the odds. But are you comfortable that you're going to get the proper service? Well, the answer for a lot of people, particularly when they're buying newer cars, is yes, I'll take it back to the Audi garage or the Volkswagen garage because I know I'm going to get the right service, rather than a garage around the corner where you don't know them at all.
And there's the impact of resale value plays on you, that if I get this service by the official dealer, it will be better for me in the future as well when I come to resell it and stuff. You're suckered into that kind of thing as well. So.
Indeed, and I was going to say, well, that doesn't apply to the legal market, but it does actually, because you can build up relationships with decent firms. You'll be taken hopefully a bit more seriously, but also if you're relying on your firm giving things on your behalf, and this comes again back to what I do, certificates of title and so on, where the firm is saying, I've done the work on this and I can certify this is the case. That's more, you're happier relying on that from a larger, more reputable firm normally than you are from a smaller one who isn't necessarily expert in that. So that plays into price, all of those things. In the same way as if you go shopping in a supermarket, if you're going to Waitrose or whatever, you're Marks and Spencer, you're probably assuming that the quality is higher and therefore the price is going to be higher versus somewhere else. Now, I've actually got a genuinely real story of when a former colleague of mine was in-house and asked 3 firms, all household names, all names that everybody who's watching will be familiar with, to quote for a large piece of work. And 2 firms gave very good and detailed emailed quotes, which covered most things, and they were, by and large, fairly similar. And the third firm said, listen, before we give you a price, we want to set up a call with you, and we want to have the head of property, the head of construction, the head of litigation, and we want to have all the head of these things talking with you on the phone to peel out what we think are going to be the issues and what you really care about. Then we're going to go away and think about it, and then we're going to give you a price. And when they went back with the price was in a sort of PDF glossy brochure. So even the time that it took to do that was probably factored into it. But the end result was that their cost was significantly higher than the other 2 firms. And they still won the work because the quality was higher, and because the feeling was, okay, you guys have thought through everything I could think of and more. I'm confident that if I go with you, I'm not going to get any nasty surprises, or at least the odds are far against it. And that your price probably includes a few of those nasty prices. So pricing is not necessarily just adding up the sum total of the aggregate parts and putting a number, or necessarily saying to the customer, what's your budget, and working to that and trying to force the square peg into the round hole. It's more, and it really goes into quality and expertise, and we've come across that countless number of times.
And I think that's an interesting lesson to be learned as well. Is think about the quality of the work that you're producing when you are looking to quote for these works. Think about how you actually go about that, how you actually engage with the customers and stuff. Whereas, in this situation, as you say, just sending out a quote of, yes, this is how much it's going to cost you, for those organisations was just their standard practice. For another organisation, they went to a lot of effort to produce something much more detailed to make the customer feel more engaged, or the client feel more engaged with that process. And even though they charge more, they still got the work, because it's about looking after your client, looking after your customer. And that's why these luxury brands exist in the world as well, because they look at the Apple tax, as people call it, for buying an iPhone compared to buying a Samsung Galaxy and stuff like that. Yes, you often know you can get exactly the same spec hardware somewhere else, but people pay for the perceived esteem of the other product.
Are you saying I've overpaid for my phone?
And me as well. I did it willingly, it seems, but
willingly paid the tax.
But it is that very much that. If you, rather than necessarily look at ways you can cut the cost of what you're doing, maybe look at actually where you can improve on the customer and client experience. And start charging more.
It's showing, isn't it? Exactly. But I dare say that if most people don't know what the jobs should cost. I mean, why should they? You're the expert. So if you, and I have actually done sort of fairly quick surveys of people to say, well, what would you pay? What would you be willing to pay to buy and sell a house, for example? And the answer is, when you're dealing with people who haven't done it recently, is usually higher than you'd think. And it isn't necessary that you go in for a £299 job, because that's just a That's just a processing factory where there'll be no real thought or consideration given to what you're doing. It's a couple of £1,000s worth of work, maybe. Yeah. And people are willing to pay for the right advice. The other thing, just to briefly end this on, is when and it goes back to the scoping thing we talked about, saying if you talk to your customers, you can find out what it is they really want. And I think the example at that time was a developer wanting to buy a property might say to you, I'm not interested in all those searches that you would normally do for somebody else who was just going to sit or use the land, because I'm going to completely redevelop what's there and I'll figure all that out myself. Just buy it for me. There's no point in quoting for all that extra stuff. And so when you start to engage with the customers, and this webinar touches on this, is it's not like giving the alternative choice close that if you've done any sales training, you'll have heard, oh, do you want that in red or do you want it in blue? Thereby implying that they must buy one or the other, but not neither. Yeah. But if you do engage with your customers and say, well, actually, we could do the full service job, which is this, or we could do a semi-service job and leave certain bits out, and that's this, and which of these would you prefer? That's not salesy necessarily, but it's a genuine caring of what your client wants. Yeah. And then you can price the job accordingly. And I personally think it also shows that you've thought through issues, much like that example I gave earlier of the firm that was way more expensive and still won the work. You're actually thinking through the customer's issues for them, raising ideas for them. That shows quality and it shows expertise. Yeah. And they'll pay for it.
Exactly. So it's a really interesting subject, isn't it? And I think, as you say, we just wanted to do this little introduction to it, but I think it's something that we can go a lot more in detail in a follow-up episode.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm conscious of the time. Yeah, we have been off for a few weeks, so I was contemplating making this a 3-hour episode, but we're hurtling towards a 1-hour episode at the moment, and that's sometimes a bit over what we like to do. So we'll wrap it up. I'll put the links to all the stuff for those pricing lectures and stuff on in the descriptions. But again, we will pick this up again as a follow-on episode, and I'll also make sure the links are in there for the prior episodes that have legal project management stuff with them. We had a couple of events and stuff. What I'll do is I'll put those into the descriptions as well, just so you can have a look at those. I think there were freebie events as well. So
they're both free,
which is good.
And we'll be at one of them. So.
Yeah, we're looking to go to one, the Bristol and Bath LegalTech meetup, which is 24th of September at Womblebond Dickinson in Bristol. We're looking to go to that. So, but yeah, I'll put the links in there for you if you want those.
Great.
But yeah, so
we leave it there.
We'll leave it there quickly, and we get out just before the hour.
Until next time.
Yeah. So we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Bye.